I call this presentation a philological approach. And I'll explain what that means to you as I proceed here. Sanskrit is old Indo-Aryan. I shall define that term in the course of the presentation. It's also defined as the language that's recorded in the grammatical tradition of Panini, Katyayana, and Patanjali. These are three grammarians known as the three Munis, who have a kind of mythic status in the Sanskrit system. And it's one of the languages of ancient India's cultural tradition. Now, what is philology? Because I call this a philological approach. Philology is something that classicists do. It's the study of a language primarily through its literature, through its literary monuments, rather than as an active and ongoing natural use. So philology is going to include both the study of linguistics and literary criticism, paleography, and a number of other areas of study that pertain to literature itself. Philology's primary goal in its pursuit of a language is not to acquire conversational skills. And that makes it a little bit different from the kind of languages that most of you have studied. But it has a peculiar twist when it comes to Sanskrit, because Sanskrit has always considered itself to be the language that is at the very core of the universe. As I say here, it encodes the blueprint of the universe, and very strict people in the Brahmanical tradition will insist that at every second of every day there is someone in the world who is reciting the Vedic verses in order to keep the universe going. If Sanskrit would stopped being spoken, sung, and uttered, the universe would collapse. So you may or may not accept that as you like, but certainly Sanskrit takes itself extremely seriously as an oral phenomenon. It's one of the delightful things about it. Sanskrit is also one of the classical languages. So let me define what I mean by that. A classical language is one in which a culture's traditions are recorded. The classical language is that form of a given language that is thought worthy of being learned in its primary classical form. A classical language is the source of a culture's wisdom, a source of its religion, a source of its vocabulary adapted into the vernacular languages. And the classical form of the language is that which the educational system tries to keep alive. Again, we don't have anything like classical English in our world, because some of the political assumptions behind this classical position have simply disappeared from our culture. Now, as a classical language, Sanskrit is the language of the sacred scriptures of the Hindus, including and beginning with the Vedic texts, but incorporating a huge body of Sanskrit texts beyond the Vedic age. Sanskrit is also the sacred language of those texts that belong to the Buddhist and the Mahayana tradition. There is what we call Sanskrit Buddhism, which again is the kind of Buddhism that was taken into Tibet in the first millennium of our era. This is the form of Buddhism that we see in Southeast Asia, in some areas, in Tibet and in Mongolia as well. So we have the sacred scriptures of two world religions that are carried by this classical language, Sanskrit. Now, in this status of being a classical language, of being a real classic, linguistically speaking, Sanskrit is a kind of mother lode, it's a kind of quarry for the vernacular languages of modern India, of which there are hundreds, literally. It provides not only a source for the vocabulary to keep modern vernacular languages mined extensively, but it also gives modern Indian literature models for its own new creation. So the genres that are practiced in Sanskrit classical literature are also being worked by modern Indian poets and prose writers and playwrights. So we see that there's a very strong tradition in the Indian system of maintaining the standards that are set in the classical Sanskrit world. And the people who are keeping Sanskrit as an educational reality most alive in India today are the members of the traditional scholarly caste, which are the Brahmins. Not only Brahmins, however, study Sanskrit. There are many educated Indians who feel that by learning Sanskrit, they're doing a patriotic thing, that they're getting to the roots of their national culture, that they're eliminating those qualities that they feel European colonial powers have imposed upon the Indian nation. So Sanskrit is a vehicle for expressing nationalism among many Indians today, and it will, for that reason, if for no other, continue to be a language that is at the basis of many Indian universities. There are a number of universities in India today that are called Sanskrit colleges, meaning that there are people in those universities who are teaching, writing, doing research in Sanskrit. Now, as for me, I'm just a classicist. I'm not an Indian. I'm not a Brahmin, certainly. And my primary love is the Western classical languages and their literature, the Greek and Latin. So what am I doing with Sanskrit? Why am I claiming to be somebody who's a lover of this language and somebody who wants to devote as much of my extra time to it as I can, some of my work hours too? There's two primary reasons, and I'm going to tell you what they are right now. The first reason, and the first draw for me that Sanskrit presented was the connection that Sanskrit and its huge body of literature has with my own discipline. So this can be this phenomenon of relationship between Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit can be looked at in terms of comparative philology, which is the traditional discipline now a couple of centuries old, in which the grammars, the vocabularies, the syntactical patterns of Sanskrit were compared with Greek and Latin, and the parent language of all of these languages, which is called Proto-Indo-European, can be traced. But in the last few decades, more and more young scholars have gotten interested in the connections between the mythologies of Greek and Latin and the mythologies that are so much alive in classical Sanskrit literature. I've just gotten this fun picture of Zeus from the internet. Zeus's name is exactly cognate with the Sanskrit word for sky. Father sky is Gyaus. And Zeus is the equivalent of that in the Greek tradition. So it's kind of amazing when you start looking at the connections between the mythologies and the literatures of these classical languages, Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit, but not just these. People also study Old Persian, the other Orchic, Slavonic, the Baltic languages, the earliest forms of mythology of these peoples, and can make very interesting comparisons. There's a whole field of study called comparative Proto-Indo-European mythology. And then poetics. Because we have so much Sanskrit poetry from the very earliest period of text, and we have quite a lot of Greek poetry, Homer and Hesiod, for example, it's natural that scholars have compared these two literary traditions and found that they can see a lot in common between the poetic lines of Homer, the dactylic hexameter, for example, or the poetic lines of the lesbian poets Sappho and Alcaeus, and some of the Vedic verses that are coming out of the Vedic. So this area of study, too, is one that's absolutely fascinating. This is, I must say, one of the first things that drew me into the study of Sanskrit and Sanskrit philology. But then there's another reason, and this is a more dangerous one for anybody who loves languages like you all do. And that is, I must warn you all that Sanskrit is extraordinarily addictive. Isn't this true? You know, it's something that it's like almost like a tar baby. When you give it a hug, it holds you and draws you into it more and more and more, and eventually you won't be able to get out. And that is a delightful state to be in if you are so immersed in this extraordinary culture. That is, you cannot turn any place in this body of literature without being absolutely delighted. So, if you're going to go there, use caution. You have been forewarned. Sanskrit is, I must confess, the most gorgeous and the most glamorous language, one of them in the world. So I just want to do a little plug for my class in the spring. If you're interested in pursuing this, but always in a very sober way, always following the classical tradition of nothing too much, which I never followed, join me for the Sanskrit class that we're offering. Today, I'm just going to give you, I'm going to tempt you a little bit with some little tiny data about Sanskrit. So I want to talk about the script, first of all. It takes a week to learn Devanagari script, and I'm not going to try to teach it to you, but I do want to show it to you, and I want to show you how it works a little bit, and kind of tempt you this way. I want to talk about Sanskrit's relationship to its parent language, Proto-Indo-European, because I know there are people here who are interested in historical linguistics. Sanskrit's own ancient history, because it does have a period of development, something like 1,000 years, before it gets codified in grammatical form. I want to look at the sound system, and a little bit about the morphology and the syntax, and if we have enough time, I don't know, I'll teach you a couple of phrases in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is a spoken language. It's one of the national languages of India, and there are many people in India who do speak and write and publish in Sanskrit. If you're interested in this, there are a couple of texts I put over on the side table here, designed to get young people interested in speaking to each other in Sanskrit. Now, the scripts. There are many scripts which one can write Sanskrit in. This little quote from Yeats. I've tweaked it so it applies to our subject. Script is a garment, and Sanskrit is a bride that cannot in that ration tinsel hide. You can write, if you must write Sanskrit, you can write it in any recognized script. As long as you get one sign for each sound, because that's the beauty of Sanskrit. One sign, one sound, no more, no less. So, Roman script works dandy if you use a couple of little diacritical marks here and there. I've put diacritical marks into some of these slides, and it's screwed the slide up. Unicode is not an attractive option when you're doing PowerPoint. So you'll forgive me, it's a little untidy, but if we want to be exact about the way we produce the Sanskrit sounds, we have to take it down. So, Indian scripts. This in itself is a field of study that's absolutely fascinating. South Asia is a huge place, and it is a place that has not been able to field a lot of archaeological work in the last 120 years. There have been interesting things coming out of some areas in South Asia. Those of you who are interested in archaeology, this is a wonderful place to go if you're independently wealthy. I'm just going to look at the one archaeological script that you're probably all familiar with, and I'll show you what the Kharoshthi script looks like. It's called donkey lips. I don't know why, but when you see it, maybe you'll see some connection. And finally, Brahmi script, which is the script, which is the parent of not only Devanagari, but we associate with modern Sanskrit, but with most of the scripts, all of the scripts, I can safely say, used in the subcontinent and in some Central and Southeast Asian countries now as well. A very productive script. The Indus Valley script. The Indus Valley, is up in the northwestern corner between Pakistan, between Afghanistan and Pakistan and India. Archaeologists have discovered some amazing cultures here, from the end of the 3rd millennium to the beginning of the 2nd millennium. There is a script that these cultures use. It's recorded in seals, such as you see here, with provocative artwork, and no one has deciphered the script yet. The Indus Valley script may have been used for Sanskrit. We don't know. Nobody knows. If you're interested in deciphering ancient scripts, find a big pot of cash and go to these archaeological sites and dig up some more stuff. So we have enough data to allow us to figure out what the script is doing. Now the Kharoshthi script, this is the script that's used in one of Ashoka's edicts from the 3rd century BC. Looks like this. It seems to have been developed from Aramaic. That's the current suggestion. There's a guy at UW, Richard Solomon, who has devoted his career to dealing with this script and the documents in Middle Indic languages that are written in it. It's used for Sanskrit too. It's confusing and painful script because, as you can see, it's hard to read. Brahmi script, on the other hand, is chaste and beautiful. Yes? Yes, this is going to be the parent of the modern Indian scripts. And this is an inscription of Ashoka again. Ashoka was a king who was reigning in built an empire in central India in the 3rd century BC, and he was something of a devotee, we think, of Buddhism, although he never talks much much about Buddhism, but he's preaching a Buddhist line, and he erects inscriptions throughout his empire. There's some in Greek that get up in Afghanistan, where there are some Greek leftovers from Alexander the Great. And this is a script that's used for these edicts, and it's going to be the parent of the script we're going to look at in a minute. But Sanskrit, modern Sanskrit, can be written in many Indian scripts, and it is written in many Indian scripts. There is nothing that says you have to write Sanskrit documents in Devanagari. This is Devanagari, the script that we think of as Sanskrit. But you can use any of these Brahmi derivatives, Bengali, Oriya, Telugu, Kannada, Grantha. These are scripts. These last three scripts are used for the non-Indo-European languages, the Dravidian languages in the south of India. Again, derived from a Brahmi script. They look very extraordinarily ornamental and beautiful, but we don't learn them when we first learn Sanskrit. Now, all Brahmi-based scripts, including the Devanagari script that we're going to be looking at, follow the same drill. And that is this. Each phoneme has a sign, and each sign can only be pronounced in one way. So it's extremely important. The graphic sign is called an akshara. We'd say that would be a letter, but that's a complication. There are about 50 of these signs. So learning the Devanagari script is going to take you about a week if you're good, and about a lifetime if you're not so good and you don't want to devote as much time to it as you should. It's considerably more difficult than Greek. So Greek scholars can have something to look forward to cut your teeth on. The akshara represents either a vowel or diphthong, or the akshara can represent a consonant with the vowel attached. So when you write the symbol, the akshara, of what we would call a consonant, is going to be pronounced naturally with an after. So the. You just see the one sign, but you add in this sound after it. There's a special sign of virama that's used to kill the if you want to have straight consonants. Occasionally, or often you do. Here you want to end a syllable or a word with a consonant sound, and you don't want an to come after it, so you have a little sign you put onto the consonant saying no it's the vowel killer. And then the consonant plus the vowel other than and Sanskrit has lots of those, requires a special reduced alphabet or vowel sign. So there's going to be some little complications, a few more signs than the 50 I told you about to learn in order to write all the words, all the sounds of Sanskrit. Now, an akshara, one of these signs, represents a vowel or a consonant plus a. So here's just a kind of a graphic example of that. This is the bhkara, the letter bh, the symbol bh. So when you see that, you read it bh, with the sound followed by a, duh. But when you want to make a different sound than you use a different vowel, a reduced form of the vowel sign for e. So there's d. There's a bihida. Bihida. But if you want to kill that final this one, you don't want that in it, you just put the little bit on like that. That kills it so you have a sound bihi. And once you get the system down, it's consistent, it works all the time, and it's pretty easy. That's the aksharas. But if you really want to, you can write Sanskrit in any script, as I mentioned. Sanskrit is written today in Roman letters, Arabic, Tibetan, Chinese, Japanese. Any way you can get the sound to come out, you can use Sanskrit if you have get enough diacritics. Every symbol represents one sound. Every sound has only one symbol. Oh my gosh, you guys know what this is, right? This is the tree of the Proto-Indo-European languages, or one version of it. So somewhere down here, you've got a mother language that's being spoken somewhere in the Ukraine, I don't know, about, 4,000, 3,500 BC, by somebody, some group of people who proceed to move out of their original homeland and move into Europe, move into South Asia, move into the Iranian plateau, move around the area to form what we call the Proto-Indo-European language family. So if you follow the trunk up here, let's see, how does this work? Goes behind that branch. Where is that? Here's the Indo-Iranian, right? Branch. And here's Sanskrit. And there's old Iranian. It's going to be Persian languages. What the tree shows you is that there's a very close connection between the old Persian languages, old Iranian languages, spoken in the Persian plateau, spoken by that tall guy with all the jewelry and the metal on his face that was fighting Leonidas, remember? Xerxes, he spoke old Persian. Oh my gosh. Well, there's a very close relationship with those languages and the Indic languages. In fact, the relationship is so close that you can translate easily by tweaking a few letters between one and the other. So they're amazingly close. They get more distant. These are the Proto-Indo-European languages I'm going to be talking about. Sanskrit is one of these. So from Proto-Indo-European as the mother language, we get a branch called the Indo-Iranian. So people filtering into the Central Asian, the Iranian plateau, and into South Asia. And this branch consists of two members, the Indic or Indo-Aryan languages, which are going to be the parent of Sanskrit, and then the Iranian, which is Xerxes and his ilk used. Indic and Iranian languages are still with us today. They're all over the place in Central Asia. They go from the Black Sea. In antiquity, the Scythians up there above the Black Sea were speaking an Iranian language. Pashto is in Afghanistan, is an Iranian language. And these are going to be traceable all the way over to West China in antiquity. So it was a huge family of languages. You see here the modern forms of these languages. They still come in Europe. The Indic languages, the direct parent of Sanskrit, are attested from the 14th century BC. Now that's early. The only language family that we have earlier than the Indic is the Anatolian. And you all know what languages are in that, right? Yeah, Hittite and Lydian, and remember old King Croesus of Lydia, yes, the Lydian language. Croesus spoke an Anatolian language too. Well, the reason we say that this branch is older is because it's got documents. So we can find stuff written in Lydian and in Hittite that can give us physical remains. The remains we have of the earliest Indic languages actually are coming out of the Anatolian culture. Because somewhere in Mitanni, which is not too far south of the Caspian Sea, in Hittite-dominated areas, there were a group of people who were speaking Indic languages, and their words get recorded, the names of their gods get recorded in these Anatolian languages documents. So that's kind of amazing. What are they doing there? Well, that's another lecture. Now, the Indo-Iranian branch of the Proto-Indo-European is characterized by certain qualities. Now, just run over these quickly because some of you may not get off on this kind of stuff. But one of the things that really excites historical linguists is the way that these languages treat what they call the feelers. These are the consonants that are produced on the roof of your mouth. So we say that the Indo-Iranian branch is a Satan branch as compared to the Canton languages. This is an old distinction, but it's a valuable one, I think. So Proto-Indo-European had this whole system of sounds you make coming against the top of the mouth. You could make sounds at the back of the mouth like k, which would be pure velars. Then they had these sounds that are palatable velars like k, and they had the labial velars, hua. And if you trace the daughter languages and how the words from the Proto-Indo-European language are expressed in daughter languages, you see that the daughter languages kind of sort themselves out according to what they do with these orders of velars. And we say that the Indo-Iranian branch divided them up into pure velars and into the palatals, which are like ch. So, for example, if we use the word who, WHO, in English it's a plus sound. In Latin it's a a q sound, right, labiovelar. In Greek, it's a t sound, tis. And in Sanskrit, it's a k. So it is extremely addictive and fascinating to trace this connection. So I don't want to spend too much time. I see myself being pulled into this screen already. The Proto-Indo-European language had a full set of voiced aspirates. Now, the voiced aspirates are made, if you take like a B or a D sound in English, and then do a puff of air when you produce it. We don't do these anymore. It'd be like b and d. We don't do them. They sound funny to us, but the modern Neo-Indic languages still make these sounds. And they are distinctive for that language family. So if you listen to The Simpsons, and the guy that's doing the Apu voice, he does a pretty good imitation of modern Indic languages because he can include this sound into his dialect of English. Okay, and then the non-high Proto-Indo-European vowels, which would be like all merge into this kind of pan vowel which I think is beautiful, but well, okay. Other things that really send classicists over the edge about the connection between Greek and Latin and Sanskrit is that in the Indo-Iranian branch of Proto-European languages like Sanskrit and Old Persian, you see the thematic and the athematic inflection of verbs. Now, you people who are doing Byron's Greek class, you've been learning all these athematic verbs. Remember didomi and tiktemi, and those are the athematics. The thematics are the only good verbs like hero and bino, the easy ones. Well, the distinction between verbs and nouns that produce some of their finite forms by adding an extra little vowel between the ending and the root. This is a feature of the Proto-Indo-European language, and we see it also in Greek and in the Indo-Iranian branch. Oh, that's great. There's 3 numbers in the Indo-Iranian languages: singular, dual, and plural. So those of you who are not familiar with the dual, there's a separate declension of nouns and a separate conjugation of verbs indicating we two, you two, those two, or two of anything. So this is something you have to learn when you learn Sanskrit. There's a whole bunch more forms you have to do. But it's also delightful. You can be so much more expressive when you have to be precise about what you're talking about. Now, Proto-Indo-Europeans' verb tenses, the moves, and the voice categories are going to be also retained in Sanskrit, Old Persian, and this branch. And all of the cases of the noun, there are 8. And in these languages, all of the cases get retained. Oh, it's a treasure trove of linguistic delights. Yes, you're smiling, yet you can hardly, but your mouth is watering. This is just exactly how I felt when I was your age. We'll have fun. Now, the Indo-Aryan languages are a sub-branch, or excuse me, as a sub-branch of Indo-Aryan. No. If you think of that language tree again, and it branches off, so Indo-Aryan and Iranian languages break off. And we get now into the languages of Indic, the languages that we can say are the Indic branch. And here we've got Old Indo-Aryan, Middle Indo-Aryan, New Indo-Aryan, and as you would imagine, these are going to be temporal categories for the most part, except for Sanskrit, the classical language that's still spoken today. Do not be dismayed by the Aryan word, it just means Indian. I probably heard people talking about the Aryan thing, so we don't worry about people who misunderstand that. It just refers to South Asia. Old Indo-Aryan has 2 dialects. We've got Vedic Sanskrit, and we've got classical Sanskrit. One of them they're slightly different one from the other. However, they're considered all Sanskrit. I'll talk about them all as soon as I go through these categories. Middle Indo-Aryan, which we first see around 300 BC, is in the form of Pali. Now, those of you interested in Buddhism may already have encountered Pali. Pali is a language related to Sanskrit. It is not Sanskrit. It is rather more streamlined than Sanskrit is, And it's the vehicle of an immense body of literature, most of which is related to Buddhism. Literature is currently being produced in Pali in Thailand, in South Asia, in Ceylon, Sri Lanka, and anywhere where serious monasteries of Mahayana Buddhism are keeping their traditions alive. Pali is a separate class. It's a difference between Latin and Italian, Latin and Romanian. It's not a daughter language of Sanskrit. It's a niece. Middle Indo-Aryan is also represented by these languages are called the Prakrits, or the natural languages. They're like ancient vernacular in relation to Sanskrit. But they form their own grammars and they form their own body of literature. Ashokan, Middle Indo-Aryan, is that form of Middle Indo-Aryan that is reproduced in those inscriptions I showed you by King Ashoka. He erected monuments all over India, and we can write a grammar of the language that he uses to record his ideas. There's another one of these ancient vernaculars, Artamad could be, which is the sacred language of the Jains. Jainism is a language as old as Buddhism, and we don't associate it quite as much as we do Hinduism in modern India, but it is a much practiced language in that country, much practiced religion in that country, and it's selected as the vehicle for its scriptures, this ancient dialect called Artamagati. And then, if you get interested in reading classical Sanskrit literature, of which there is 15% more than we have, 12 times as much Sanskrit literature as we have Greek literature. It's a huge body of stuff, and most of it is still in manuscript form because there aren't enough scholars to edit it for European consumption so that you can actually get a text. And a lot of this stuff is withering away in monasteries, withering away in libraries. It's going to be lost. So all of you, study Sanskrit, become editors of literature. When you study Sanskrit, classical Sanskrit literature, you'll find that there's a genre of drama. It's not tragedy, it's not comedy, but it is drama, rather like Greek drama, in that the drama is based upon the mythology found in Sanskrit literature. In this drama, the main characters, the main male characters, the king, the Brahmins, the courtiers speak Sanskrit, and the other figures speak Prakrits. So the ladies of the court, the slaves, the uneducated, lazy Brahmin, they speak the Prakrits. So there's this dramatic dialect sort of recorded in these wonderful dramas. Talk about them really well. Now, New Indo-Aryan, there's something like 400 languages just going through the Ganges Valley, each one of which is a little bit understandable by its neighbor. The big ones, you know, Hindi, Bengali, Gujarati, Punjabi, there's lots of them. And they use the Devanagari script for the most part, not all of them. And they represent the modern language of Indo-Aryan. Now, to take a look at Vedic Sanskrit. This form of Sanskrit is called Shruti. Shruti means listening or hearing, and it's called that because people still, young Brahmins, are still taught the Vedic scriptures by listening to somebody chanting to them over and over again. A Brahmin kid who's in the traditional system starts learning the Vedic literature when he's 6 or 8 years old. It takes him 2 years just to learn the Samhita, the Rig Veda, and then another 12 or 13 to be sure that he has an encoding, the oral encoding of these texts. The system of encoding, of memorizing the Vedic texts, which originate, where do they originate? Pious Brahmins will say they've always been in existence. Philologists will say they must have been created around 1300, 1200 BC. I'm not going to take a stand on this, but they've been taught for at least 3,000 years in this oral manner in the traditional system. Nowadays, of course, in the West, we learn them in a different way. But they are, as we hear them chanted today, the Vedic Sanskrit texts are exact replicas of what they were in the first millennium BC. So we can use them as sources for this ancient language. So Vedic Sanskrit was used in the Vedic texts. These consist of, as you probably know, hymns and songs. You know, this is the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, liturgical formulas, prayers, which all Brahmins have to learn. Brahmins are supposed to perform the prayers, the liturgies at ceremonies in India. The Yajurveda, the Kalava Veda. And then these primary scriptures have their own traditions of texts that open them up. So we think of these as commentaries. The Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, the Upanishads are explications of what's in the Vedic scriptures. And we have this body of texts called sutras, which are technical manuals. They explain explain how to do something in the appropriate, sacred way. Back in the 60s, the only thing we knew about was the Kama Sutra, which you don't have to worry about at all, which you're young. Now, that's Vedic Sanskrit. Classical Sanskrit, which again has immense value, is the language that is codified by these guys called the three Munis. A Muni is a sage or a holy man. And the Muni Triad, the triad of Munis, consists of Panini, who created the first scientific grammar of Vedic and classical Sanskrit, Katyayana, who wrote corrections to Panini. Panini was too dense, he was too difficult, he was replicating a language which Katyayana felt needed to be tweaked a bit, so he wrote commentaries, Vartikas. And then Patanjali, this picture you see here. Patanjali was the commentator on the grammatical tradition. He explains it to us. He explains all kinds of wonderful things about Sanskrit in his commentaries. He's depicted as a snake here because he was held in such great veneration by his culture, and because he's supposed to have been an avatar of the great world snake of Vishnu, of the great serpent Shesha. So he is represented as almost like a little. He also wrote he also attributed to him is the Yoga Sutras. So those of you interested in yoga will think of Patanjali as a figure who has made a major contribution to philosophy and to what we call yoga. If you're interested in yoga as a way of life, you will eventually come upon the Yoga Sutra attributed to Patanjali. Now, what Sanskrit sounds like? Sounds are either swaras, which means sounded, and these will be what kind of sounds you're supposed to. They'll be the vowels, what we call consonants. And then sounds are either swaras or vyanjanas, or what we would call a consonant. So you can divide all of these 50 or more, roughly 50 sounds, into one of the two categories. Swaras or vyanjanas. There are 13 swaras. And when they are in Roman script, this is by criticals, you have the shuddhas. These are the simple sounds. And these are either one mora, 1 beat long, or 2 beat long. So we can think of them as long and short forms of the vowels. Of the swaras. The only problem is with that first sound, which is and its long counterpart is so it has a qualitative difference. Otherwise, the only difference in these simple swaras is a matter of length. And so those of you who do Latin will recognize the system there. Sanskrit, the pronunciation I, I, U, there's no long vowel. And then some of the diphthongs, two of which really aren't diphthongs, but they're grouped in this category for a number of good grammatical reasons, are A and I, O and I. These are either two moras or more long, depending on the kind of poetic text. If you look at them in Devanagari script, they're gorgeous, yes? And they look similar. So here's the A, and this long form, A, E, and E, U, R, A, O, I. So those are easy to do, pretty too. As for the vyanjanas, the sounds that we call consonants, we've got sparshas, Antahastas, and Ushman. So let me just show you what those look like. Sparsha means contact, and it refers to the place in your mouth where your tongue occludes the air. So we call these what? Stops. Yeah, they're just stop consonants. The Sanskrit grammarians got these stop consonants really carefully categorized, and they give us 5 possible places of contact in the mouth, and also 4 orders of sounds, along with 1 nasal linked with each of these orders. So I'm going to show you how these look on the ground in just a second. So the sparsha words, these are the sets of the contacts. And so kankya, sparshas are produced for velum, which is the back of your mouth, top of your mouth. The talavias is the soft palate. The murdanyas at the hard palate, moving from the back to the front. Dunches at the teeth, and the oshas at the lips. So we have our own categories of these, right? What do we call these? Kunjas are the what? Retroflexes, yeah, and dentals and labials, yeah, that's what you got. And there's 5 orders which I've already described. I think the unvoiced, unaspirated. So then the unvoiced, aspirated. The voiced unaspirated, and the voiced aspirated, and then the nasals, which all correspond to places in your mouth. So it's a very tidy system. It's not natural, is it? It's not supposed to be natural. It's Sanskrit. It's superior to nature. The Prakrits are the natural ones. This is the divine and cosmic language. So it has to be very, very carefully observed. You have to be careful with pronounce it. These are the sparshas in the daily letter system, which I won't go through now, but don't they look nice? Oh, I love those symbols. The antashtas are the interludes. These are the simple vowels. We got your ya, you got your flat ra or la, you got your la, and then you got your wa. It's hard for Americans. Wa. It's neither a V nor a wa. It's a wa. Wa. It's almost buzz. Wa. If you talk to a Hindi speaker and you try to get them to distinguish between a wa and a va, they don't do it. It's like there's only one sound in this language system, and it's wa. It's that. Do your best. The Ushmans are the sibilants, and these again have corresponding forms in the mouth. So you got your velar ha. You got the palavya sha, that's a hard vowel sha, and the retroflex sha, and the dental sa. Now, my students say they all sound alike, but my old Sanskrit professor at UBC, Ashoka Pushkar, used to get real cross when you didn't distinguish these sibilants. The trained ear can distinguish them, and the cosmos can too. So it's important that you distinguish them all. Finally, we have this kind of nasalized sound at the end of words, which is called anuswara, and a visarga, which we're not used to hearing. It comes at the end of a word, and it sounds like ugh, a very pronounced H sound, ugh, ich, ugh. Those also are signs, and that's a whole battery of sounds. But we have one more thing to mention. Santi occurs. You probably know this term from your linguistics classes. Santi is, I'm quoting, environmentally conditioned change in words and sounds at the frontiers. Either when a root and an ending come together, there's something that happens, or when 2 words, separate words, come together, the end of one and the beginning of the other are going to collide and make a different sound. Well, in English, how do we deal with that? We pronounce the Santi and we ignore the spell for the most part, yes? But not Sanskrit, because this is a language that insists you get things precise. You have to learn the rules, and there are a lot of rules. Many rules that have to be uploaded before you can read Sanskrit, and that is an unfortunate fact. When you start teaching Sanskrit, that's when you can expect many of the students to do things, to make strange decisions. Now we've done more or less reviewed the phonetics. Let's try pronouncing this verse. This is a verse from Han. So can you do it? That's very nice. Yeah. Atma, Udira, Sameti, Arthan. This is Sandhi. This should be the letter I. Sameti. That's 18. Goes. It comes together. It. Sameti, Arthan. Mano, Yukade, Vakshaya.
Syllables get a kind of stress tone, anything like that?
Yeah, in Vedic Sanskrit and through the time of Panini, Sanskrit had a tonal accent. Certain schools of Vedic recitation nowadays preserve the tone. They sing the Vedic lines, and the young children have to learn the tone. So it is still preserved. It's almost identical to tones. But somewhere around the turn of the first millennium of our era, Sanskrit started to get accent, stress accent, and the rules for stress accent in Sanskrit are identical to the Latin system. The law of the long penal. If the second to the last vowel, a syllable is long, it gets the accent, otherwise the accent falls to the antepenal. It's an easy language once you get practice. Morphology, there are 8 cases. The Sanskrit grammarians number them. Patani, Diya, Tritiya, Tatati. They go 1, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and then a Sabotana, which is the vocative case. They don't consider that to be the case. Some people do. There are 3 numbers, and there are 3 genders. Masculine and neuter, reflecting the parent language and Greek Latin as well. The Sanskrit grammarians, when talking about morphology, prefer to think of the syntax of the sentence as determined not by case, but by what they call the karakas. So they talk about the nominative case or the subject as the doer of the action, and the object of the verb, the karman, as that which receives the action. But when you use this system to try to explain how passive voice works, oh dear, it gets very complicated indeed, because the agent still continues to be the agent, but he becomes expressed in the third case, third reflective. So this becomes complicated. But if you look through this case usage list, you see this is pretty standard for Greek and Latin as well, except for Latin. Greek has lost a few of those cases. Here's a little poem that illustrates the Karaka. Sanskrit pedagogy is filled with charming poems that illustrate how things work in the grammar. So here we've got a poem about Krishna. Krishna, the avatar of Vishnu. Krishna rakshatu mam chara chara guruhu. So here's Krishna as the subject. He's undergone sati, the O for Aham. He's in the nominative case. So Krishna, may he protect me. Krishna, who is the guru, who neither who is the guru of things which move and things that don't. So yeah, isn't that great? Ha! Poetry is built into the system. Krishna namasyami aham. So here God is a direct object. As in Greek and Latin is on. I do homage to. It is to Krishna. Here we've got the next one. Krishnena amarashatravo vimahataha. So the enemies of the gods, the immortal ones, are deposed, are destroyed by Krishna. This is an instrumental. Now here's what we call the dative. Krishnaya smai namaha. Namaha is again homage. Homage to Krishna. To this guy, Krishna. Here's what we call the ablative. Krishnad. Krishnad eva susrutita jagadidam. Jagadidam, the whole world, this world, is originated alone from Krishna. Here's genitive, asya. Krishnasya daso snyaha. Santi occurred here. It should be asmi. Asmi being Amy or sum, I am. So aham asmi, I am the dasaha, the slave of Krishna. Krishna, this is locative. In Krishna, let devotion be, as a third person imperative, unmoving, constant, in Krishna. And finally, the Sambodhana, the vocative. Bhagavan He Krishna Tabhina Namaka. Oh Krishna, blessed one, to you, homage. So a nice thing you can memorize, and you've got all the cases right there. What a language. Now, the verbal system, well, maybe I should pass over that, because that's a little tricky. Yes, I don't want you to see that. Here's some uses of Sanskrit. As a language of religion, I should have a hub in there, as a language of poetry, of science, language that may unite India, and again, as an energy of passion. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to run through these slides kind of quickly, so you can be out of here quickly. Sanskrit is the Devavani, it's the language of gods. So traditionally, mythologically, you divide the universe into three bits: the heavens, the earth, and the subterranean regions. And the gods who live in heaven speak Sanskrit. It is Devavani. It's the language of the gods. So people on earth who speak Sanskrit must be Brahmins, who are the gods on earth, or those beings who are so enlightened that they have studied Sanskrit. And they become like gods on earth. You've got to keep it clean. You've got to keep it free from corruption. It is a divine thing. It's always existed, and it is the first reality. The world emanated from Sanskrit. There's a body of philosophy called the philosophy of the grammarians, which bases the origin of the world in the word, which is not too far from some Christian interpretations. This is the word that is pronounced moksha. Moksha means release. So according to this grammatical philosophy, if you study Sanskrit, study the origin, study words as the basis of reality, you will experience release from samsara, the nastiness of a rebirth in the system. I like grammar that way. Language this is a language of literature. This is a shot from the Mahabharata film, which we have here in the library. If you'd like to see it sometime. It's a language of epics, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana. It's a language of drama. This is a scene from the recognition of Shakuntala. Very romantic comedy, but there's many other wonderful dramas that we hardly ever see because there aren't any Sanskrit scholars, so you know it. One can play with sounds in Sanskrit, and this is what makes it such one of the reasons why it is so addictive. I'm going to end with this because we are out of time. One of the great poets, the Shakespeare of Sanskrit literature, is Kalidasa. And there are many stories about Kalidasa and how he won prizes as a great poet and how he was able to manage extraordinary poetic feats. This is a couple of verses that were related to one of these stories. There's a kind of poetry in Sanskrit called a samasya. And it's a game. You give a poet the last line of a verse that is supposed to be the last line of his poem, and he has to create the three preceding verses. It's tricky. Modern Hindi people still play this game with songs from Bollywood movies. So their ears are very tuned to this. What he was given was these last, usually you give to people, the poets, nonsense lines. Now that's hard to pronounce, and it doesn't mean anything. It says something like ta-bong, ta-bong, pong, ta-bong, ta-bong. So some smartass gave Kalidasa this word. It's scanned. It's part of a metrical system. And said, okay, make up a poem around this. And he went and thought about it, and this is what he came up with. It sounds something like Rama Visheke Madhvalaya Hasta Chuto He Nagatastarunya Sopana Masaja Karoti Shabda Tatang Tatang Tang Tatang Tatang. It works. What it says is this. At the coronation of Rama, the hero of the Ramayana, from the hand of a Tarunya, a young girl, who was intoxicated with delight. There fell a golden pot. There's a little girl at the coronation. She's so excited and happy about the parties and the coronation. She's carrying a gold pot. Well, it fell from her hand, and so Banama, it settled, having settled or fallen upon the staircase. It makes the sound. There you go. See what you can do. Even have an immense amount of fun with this language. But I will not keep you anymore. This is what I'm going to offer you for Sanskrit, and I hope I'll see some of you in the spring in classical studies.